Good afternoon and welcome to Strategies for Addressing the Data Quality Component of Your EHR Migration, a health systems CIO production sponsored by E4 Health. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health Systems CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments anytime in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Kay Marhefka, Deputy CIO at RWJ Barnabas Health, Bessie J, Director of Integration and Technical Application Support with Emory Healthcare, and Rich Emilio, VP Healthcare IT Operations and Consulting with E4Health. And then we will have our audience Q&A. So let's jump right in. Kay, let's start with you. Can we get an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. Thank you, Anthony, and good afternoon, everyone. Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health System is located in the state of New Jersey, obviously. We are 13 plus hospitals strong, over 400 medical group practice locations, and we are the clinical partner to the Rutgers Medical School. A big highlight for us is that we are finishing up on a massive EMR implementation. Starting on this Saturday, we'll be all through with 4.5 years of migrating from over 200 plus disparate systems to a single platform. And I couldn't think of a better reason to sit on this panel with all the experience that we've had with my data migration and so forth with our major project. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Kay. Excited to have you here. Bessie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anthony, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I am part of Emory Healthcare, and we are 11 facilities plus around 400 clinics, and recently migrated from multiple EMRs over to Epic in 2022, and really excited about sharing our experiences and lessons learned around not only the clinical migration, but the financial migration of data.
Very good, Bessie. Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. And folks, thank you for taking time out of your day. I'm Rich Emilio. I'm the Vice President of Health IT Services at E4 Health. Those of you that don't know E4 Health, we are a national consulting and professional services organization headquartered in the greater Philadelphia area. We have deep background, really thriving in the HIM and HIT space. And through that combination, we've really found our footing in helping organizations through complex change events. Current healthcare setting, whether it's M&A activity, whether it's EHR migrations, the change events are rampant right now. And we really focus on three main areas as we're helping these organizations through the events. The first is driving successful outcomes through these changes. Right? E4 Health, our foundation is really in lean engineering. So pairing our lean engineering background with our tools, as well as our expertise in driving complex programs, we've really helped countless clients through their changes. The second is managing and optimizing the financial health of an organization. Again, in today's landscape, right, the financial implications for organizations really is critical in everything they do. And last, the reason we're here today is we really help manage the identity of patient data through these complex changes. Again, EHR changes, M&A, all of that data is moving, and there's becoming an increased focus on that data, as well as the outcome, as we move toward AI, of the importance of that data within the EHRs, as well as surrounding systems. So I really look forward to the conversation, and thank you again.
All right. Very good, Rich. Thank you. Okay, Kay, we're going to start with you. We're going to just go into some general data quality stuff first. How would you describe the state of data quality in health systems today? What are the main causes of poor data quality, and why is this such a difficult problem to solve? And the downstream problems that result in poor data quality. So if you'd like to jump in there.
Sure. So is in regards to the state of data migration in healthcare today, there are probably 4 tenets that I know that we've kept in mind as we were going through our major migration projects here at RWJ Barnabas, and they are maintaining accuracy, completeness, consistency, and relevance. And as we went through all of the phases, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity as the questions go on to talk about this in more detail, but based on how we did it, and when and the what, we just made sure that we always kept those 4 tenets in mind. It has to be accurate. The data has to be accurate, and it needs to maintain its accuracy. The completeness factor, that goes without saying, consistency, but the one that the gotcha for us was the relevance. Those data elements that we maybe considered extremely important 10 years ago are not as important today, and vice versa. We had to constantly question ourselves on the relevance of data, both during the migration and certainly through our data governance participation afterwards. So we're us, and that's how we looked at protecting our data and the quality of our data. But keeping in touch with my colleagues across a lot of the healthcare organizations that are of our size, that seems to be pretty much the sentiment. Are those 4 tenets.
Let's talk, Kayla, let me follow up with you a little bit on that and talk more about relevance. You said relevance changes over time, and you mentioned governance committees. How are you leveraging committees and the users and the clinicians to make sure that they are providing you with that definition of relevance that then you are making sure is what is being preserved and whatnot?
Right. So having the right people at the table to have those discussions and make those decisions is absolutely imperative. There is interest from all over our organization. There has been, and there will continue to be interest in, I have to collect this. I have to be able to measure that. I have to report on this. And everything has a priority. And that's all fine. And we do have a really good governance structure over our data, as well as how we add things, how we pull things back. We have an excellent governance structure over that. But the folks at the table have to be representative of the data that we're collecting. And that sounds like a boil the ocean kind of thing. It's actually not. It's actually not. Without a doubt, our providers are represented really well. And when I say providers, I mean from our physicians, surgeons, specialty clinicians on down to our APPs, and then even down further to our RN, LPN. Have to have HIM there, without a doubt. We obviously have a fair amount of our data and analytics folks that are there. And then revenue cycle folks we have in the mix as well, but always a great conversation, always a very robust conversation with a lot of debate. But we're consistent. We try and stay accurate in terms of relevance. That's the fun. That's actually the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
But it's probably the best structure that we have within IT.
Excellent, Kay. Thank you very much. Bessie, your thoughts?
I want to kind of piggyback on what Kay commented about in terms of relevance of the data. I think that tells the story of we have a good problem in regards to our advancement of technology and the ability to leverage analytics from an AI and machine learning perspective. However, we have to ensure the relevance of the data and how it's incorporated into those models. And when we're looking at the relevance, to complement Kay's feedback on who's a part of those conversations, one of the items that Emory's been really successful in is defining what we call data stewards in the life cycle of a patient. So from that patient's experience at home, leveraging patient advocates to the discharge of that patient, and how are we looking at that data and what does it mean? Also capturing, when we look at the overall fragmentation of the data, which is a problem today, is what does the data mean historically? And then how does that translate to the future? Because as a organization that has a pillar around research, we need to ensure that we don't lose alignment of historic data as we move forward to streamlining data in the future.
Great point. Very good. Rich, your thoughts on what you're hearing?
Yeah, all great conversation. And what you all are saying is really one of the pillars that, as we work with organizations, we're always hopeful that we're there prior to the fire, right? Best practice is that pre-planning. You don't want to take all of the data within your current system and just move everything without doing a true analysis. Having HIM, having a CMIO. We've even heard of late through a survey we did with Chime members that a chief data officer is now really becoming a prominent figure to oversee that. So that whole idea of governance is one of the things that, as we go into organizations, and granted, we have a very skewed seat right now because we're normally being called when there's an issue, right? So we're seeing data quality as poor. Now, we did, through that Chime survey, work with those subset of Chime members, and it was actually stunning to hear that more than half of them felt their data quality was either subpar or poor, and a lot of that was because they didn't have the proper governance. I want to just take a quick little tangent in that second question, right? I understand, and we understand the relevance, and getting to the point of when you're analyzing that data, right? The question of why is this such a difficult problem to solve? I think we're all in agreement that data quality is an issue in today's landscape, but why is it difficult to solve? And I think one of the main factors that we've seen is that organizations in the past treated their systems and their hardware as their assets within the organization. And that change to treating your data as an asset hasn't quite gotten there. For the more progressive organizations, absolutely, right? They have governance in place, but most organizations aren't there yet. And I think until they get there, it's going to remain a difficult problem to solve. And I think compounding that is, from an industry standpoint, there's no measure on what clean data looks like, right? There's not been a concerted effort to say, what are you measuring and how are you measuring the cleanliness of your data? So oftentimes an organization doesn't know their data quality because there aren't those measures. And there's not that forward thinking of how do we put governance in place? How do we even create a scorecard with the right metrics to measure how are we doing as an organization, and then zero in on how do we put the right measures in place to then clean up that data.
And
Rich,
Rich,
go ahead, Bessie.
okay, Rich, if I can comment, I think that speaks and highlights to one of the critical components of that data governance is establishing that culture shift. And so where Kay talked about, it's from leadership to boots on the ground, clinical and financial workers. How are we changing that mindset within our organization that data matters? And looking at one of the things that Emory's done is created a hub and spoke model where we are doing education on data, how it can be used, what are the definitions of that, and then letting them see the outcomes of reporting. Because a lot of the times we are capturing information, they're like, okay, I'm capturing this, but what is the impact of using that data? And so I think as organizations are starting to look at this, treating it as a true culture shift, will help drive the overall integrity of the data.
Absolutely.
Bessie, what do you think are the main ways that data goes bad? Like, is it bad manual inputs by frontline workers in a health system? Because a lot of times now patients are directly inputting information into an iPad or into a portal when they're at home before they even get there. Are they making errors? So how are some of these errors starting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really a combination of all of the inputs. Of course, yes, there is human error from both a staff member on the hospital side as well as the patient entering that data. But then what I also want to consider is the cross checks of the data. So as those data is being entered, what is the interpretation of it? And then the conversation between the patient and the clinician and where that's occurring to validate it. And then kind of a step further is because of the lack of standards, when we start to share the data through interoperability technology tools, there is a difference in how that data is ingested and what it means to each of the organizations that causes what I would consider really inconsistent data definitions and making it to a point of being difficult to measure and report against.
Hey, any comments on that? Any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
nothing causes more havoc than on data and the data pool than manual entry. Nothing. And we found that out through our big migration project, and little pockets of manual entry that no one was really even aware of, that that needed to be resolved. One of the hardest things to change is when manual entry is very much part of a very embedded process, and then to try and figure out how that process is going to continue, obviously without the manual entry, that's a project in itself. But we did conquer a lot of that, but by doing that, we uncovered hidden data. That's another got you, and a lot of separate databases that were being kept on little servers under desks, and you find all this out, unfortunately, when it takes a big project to actually kind of flip the table over so that you can see everything and then somewhat start from scratch. But what you have to one of the things that we made sure that we learn from this is don't do it all over again. We have a chance here to keep it clean and to keep it managed and to keep it governed. And so that was the catalyst for the structure that I talk about in terms of our data governance and the input and the involvement of that from the entire organization. Rich, I think you said it, or maybe it was Bessie, but it's data governance, data quality is a culture, and if you don't treat it, I hate to use this term, but enforce it as part of your organizational culture, then it's just going to be that, it's like HIPAA mandate training you got to do once a year. It just becomes like that thing that sits over there instead of becoming part of the DNA of the organization.
Rich, we get the idea of bad data, meaning the data is incorrect. And Kay just brought up the idea of conflicting data, where there may be multiple records in multiple places. One has been updated, but another area it has not been updated. No single source of truth. Any more there? What your thoughts on how people can work on those problems?
Absolutely. Again, I think it goes to the pre-planning and having the right key stakeholders at the table, right? Source of truth is key, right? Understanding if you have multiple records, what is your source of truth as you move forward? Kind of tying into the bad data, we've seen organizations overall application portfolio continue to balloon. And Kay, you mentioned these hidden systems and these databases. So with all of that data, understanding who is going to be the driver and who is the source of truth, and then providing that governance and your measurement of KPIs against that, starts with MPI. What is your source of truth from an MPI? Do your cleanup, ensure your one record. The cost of, a duplicate across an organization is more drastic than you'd think. And I'm sure Kay, both you and Bessie understand that fully. Then, right, then you can start looking at the data and then measuring the relevance of that data. But it comes back to who are the stakeholders. Everybody has to have a say, and not just thinking you have to move that data to the next EHR. There's other options out there, and it's also a time for organizations to look at what's financially most beneficial to the organization, where all of this data lies. Clinicians are going to have one view of what's important to them. HIM is going to have a totally different view, and ensuring their legal health record remains intact, or there's a way to ensure your legal health record remains intact with all of these disparate systems and various sources of truth.
Right. And Anthony, and Bessie, if I could just jump in really quick. The MPI, we had 4 major EMRs that we had to, as well as many third-party ones that we had to consolidate under to become our Epic platform. The MPIs from all of that, we had, I think it was like almost a 28 to 30% redundancy duplication rate. And thank you, E4, you were tremendous help in helping us clean all that up. And we're down, I think, to less than 2% now, maybe even 1%. It's wonderful. But to get to that point was a lot of work. And we never, ever want to go back to, to where we were before. But one thing, I've used this term before, Anthony, and some other panels that I've been on with you, and I'll use it again. A colleague of mine from a long time ago said, remember, with data, it's like once you convert it, it's like you spit in the glass. You can't unspit. It's it's in. And so clean data going in was definitely what we strive to do in terms of migration and keeping our data quality with cleaning it up before we moved it into moved it to home base. So I just wanted to get those 2 things in there because it was relevant to what Rich was saying.
And Kay, that's a good segue, because one of the other questions we were going to address is this opportunity when you're doing a migration, as an opportunity to cleanse the data. But you're saying it's even more than an opportunity; it's a requirement, because you're talking about if you think of the new destination as a pristine pool, your spitting analogy. You don't want to spit in the new pristine pool. So you don't want to just, if you're thinking like, I'll just convert and then we'll clean later, you're saying that's a really bad idea.
It's a horrible idea.
Horrible.
It's a horrible idea. Don't do it.
Yeah.
The sales gimmick will be that, oh, we have tools that will help you clean that up because, on our new, no, don't do it.
Yeah. And Kay, to complement that, it's really, when you're cleansing the data, it's having the conversation around what do you want to do with the data, because in engaging all of the stakeholders in that conversation from a clinical perspective, research, finance, HIM, legal, quality and compliance, really looking and bringing those stakeholders in, because there's a step of everyone thinks, oh, we're going to a new EHR. We don't have to worry about our previous, but there's a lot of work in cleansing that data within your EHR before you move it forward. So looking at where records are incomplete as one example, and making sure that you've cleaned that data, but then also having the conversation of what do I need to migrate versus migrate into my EHR versus have available in an archive versus I don't need the data. It's not of use, and purging that and then putting on my research hat for future use, the de-identified data and how we're going to approach that.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say I'll agree with all of that, right? That it has to be an ongoing process. It cannot be a one time. Even worse, if you don't pair that cleansing with your change, again, whether that's M&A, I know we're focusing on EHR changes, but M&A is, excuse me, just as prominent in today's landscape. But if you kick that can down the road, all of your other projects continue to pile up, and it just will continue to be kicked. What we're seeing, and I'm certainly interested if, I know, Kay, you've taken on a more proactive approach. But what we've heard and what we've seen through our clients is two things. One, organizations are struggling to secure the budget for that cleansing and validation even of data that is moving. Right? It's one thing to ensure your cleansing, but once you move that data, a lot happens, whether it's through transformation of that data into the new EHR or into the archive. They simply don't have the budget. And I guess secondary to that, what we're hearing is, and we heard directly from one CIO tell us, with the price tag of our EMR, we expected that the vendor was going to play a more active role in helping us ensure the data was clean going in. And what we see, and interested in what you see, is the vendors have their work plans. The new EHR vendor is focused on implementing their software, and they'll give you a table to ensure you're doing the mappings, and they'll take that extract file from the legacy system. But that's kind of all they're doing, and they're expecting the client to have all of those plans in place to ensure you have the right mappings, you're validating the data, and you're cleansing it so that you're starting with a clean slate. And I think that's something that organizations are struggling with, is they're expecting this, and the vendor saying, I'm not doing that. That's on you, client. And there's no budget, there's no funding, and then they're scrambling.
Right.
Yeah, Rich, and what's the agenda of the EMR is to get you turned on, right, onto the platform, get you billable, right, to get that migration going. So telling you, as that's their main objective, telling you, oh, by the way, you need to factor in 6 months of data work and a whole boatload of money before we get started, is not really good for a sales pitch, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so, so Betsy, what would you tell someone who the discussions are starting about an EMR migration, a major EMR migration? What would you tell them if there's any high level advice about time and funding needed to do the proper data cleansing before you're going to migrate that data?
I would start with ensuring that they really take that data cleansing aspect, and that is the phase 0 of your project. As you're looking to move to a new EHR, you can be working on, even prior to selection with your current system, what is the cleansing that can be done now with your team members' engagement before they move to the new EHR work. So there's looking at that work up front and first cleansing what you can in the partnership with your previous EHR. And then the second piece of that is, once you start the planning around what you're going to do with your data in the new EHR, is that you don't put those conversations off. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to focus on that later. It is absolutely critical that you work on the migration of the data as you are building out the new EHR, so that you understand your data today and how it's going to appear in your new system for your clinicians. If you're not having those conversations up front, you are going to end up putting data in your system, quite frankly, in the wrong way. And it's not going to receive the benefits that your clinicians were expecting to receive. To speak to, the new EHR and their advisement, I will say we were able to leverage previous experiences. They were helpful in connecting us with customers and sharing outcomes and lessons learned. What they were not able to do, and I wouldn't expect them to do, is really understand our data. That's our responsibility in understanding our data and our operational workflows so that we are partnering with them as we ingest the data and create new workflows.
Excellent. Rich, you said that often you're brought in when it's emergency fire drill time, right?
Yes, sir.
And that sounds like it makes sense. I don't mean in a positive way, but what I mean is based on what we said typically happens. Um, Someone hasn't realized, hasn't done this work. Maybe they realize right before the data is supposed to be migrated, and they go, "Oh my God, this is a really bad idea." But we're slated, we're down this road. Rich, come in and help clean up this data because we're migrating in 2 months.
Yes,
Give me
sir.
some typical scenarios of how and when you're brought in, both in the fire drill situation, but also in an ideal situation.
Yeah, so I'll start with the easier and the ideal situation. We have numerous clients that we're working with on a regular basis where we're able to start that pre-planning and ensure the proper governance is in place, right? We don't want to be a situation where it's just IT at the table making decisions on what's happening with that patient data. So we're ensuring and we are mandating that that organization have a structure in place that all key stakeholders have a say at the table. And we are going through their data and helping them drive through that decision making of what's being migrated to the new EHR, what's going to the document management system, what's going to an archive, and what's being purged. I think that out of the gate and ensuring you have buy-in from all of those stakeholders, right? Again, we said earlier on, every one of those stakeholders has a different agenda. A clinician wants his life to be easier or her life to be easier. HIM has their agenda. But at the end of the day, the goal is all the same to ensure that um, cleansing of the data and you're starting with a true clean slate. In the less ideal, the fire drill situation, we've become accustomed, unfortunately, to quickly jumping in. That's where the lean background really helps. We are able to assess an organization's health, whether it's their data, whether it's their program or implementation, pretty quickly through our scorecard techniques. And again, we were able to zero in on here's exactly where your issue is, and then in short order put together ultimately a blueprint on here's your current state, here's where your ideal future state is and needs to be, and this is how we're going to get there. The good news with us, right, as an organization, I mentioned that HIM and HIT roots within our organization. We have a couple hundred credentialed individuals, whether they're RHITs, whether they're nurses, that given the landscape in healthcare today and the poor data quality, they have experience, they have expertise across just about every major and niche EMR that's out there. So we're able to go into an organization, and whether it's Allscripts or Athena or MedHost, we're able to provide somebody that understands that system, nurses with critical eyes to that keen detail that understand, right, from a mapping, this value really equates to this in your future state system. It's just a minor terminology difference, and put them back on the right path. It's not always easy. It's not always overnight, but our success rate is pretty darn high in doing that through our techniques and our background there.
Very good. Thank you, Rich. Okay,
Yes,
let's
sir.
bring you in here. Who are the key executives that must work together during an EHR migration project to ensure data quality is addressed? What other operational leaders, such as users and clinicians, should be included? And um, let me ask you another question that goes with this, which is, as the CIO, are you the quarterback or the general contractor of this process? And then you have to make sure everyone's engaged. That's always a question when it comes to IT is Where are you leading and where are you supporting?
As far as being our IT executive leadership being the quarterback for the migration process, yes, we are. It's sort of a hot potato that gets tossed all around the C-suite, and it actually, I feel it lands where it's supposed to land. And so it is on us, though, to make sure that decisions around data migration are made to everyone's satisfaction, specifically around what the patient needs the most. That's pretty much at the center of all of our decisions. So I think, Bessie, you said it best. Some of those crucial decisions are first and foremost what gets archived and what gets migrated. There's a big difference, and hence what doesn't. And Anthony, you've known me since my UMass Memorial days, and there was a physician I worked with very closely there. This was back in 2008, 2009. I'll never forget what he said when we said, well, what do the doctors want? What do the physicians want? And his response was, they want everything, everywhere, all the time, and forever. And I think we actually had a T-shirt made out of that because it was so ridiculous at the time. But now we actually have the tools to actually make that happen. We just have to make sure that they're in the right buckets and in the right places in order to maintain forever. And what that is. So without a doubt, all the folks who need to make those decisions were at our decision table from the beginning. And then what you want to make sure that you don't have is the old school person who says, doesn't matter, I don't care, no conversation, I want to have everything everywhere all the time and forever. Those are the folks you kind of don't want to have at the table. But you know who they are, you know who the right ones are. But yes, quarterbacks, IT execs, no doubt about it. And representation from that group that I talked to you about earlier, physicians, clinicians, certainly the revenue cycle, and data and analytics.
Wow, a lot of good stuff there. Betsy, let's go to you. I want to talk a little bit more about this. Well, you can answer the question on the screen, but in the back of my head, what I want to go to next is to talk a little bit more about relevancy. You've got what Kay was talking about some people say they want everything. Most people don't want that. They just want to see what they need, and that's what relevancy is. And when we don't deliver relevancy, we can contribute to burnout, right? Because now it's you're showing me a fire hose, like you're dumping everything on me, and that's not what I need. You're giving me, we use that term, cognitive burden. You've increased. You should use that at home a lot. You increase my cognitive burden. That's what I tell my family, and that's a bad thing. But either you want to address what's on the screen or talk more about relevancy.
So a couple of points that I want to hit, and Kay described it well, is in addition to engagement of the members within the healthcare organization, she highlighted the patient at the center. And one of the things that we did was when we were making a decision to migrate our data, ensuring that we had patient advocates at the table who could represent our patients as a whole and the data that they would be seeing. Because as you move to a new EHR, you're obviously introducing a new portal for your patients, and what data is migrated and what data is important to them for their overall healthcare journey. So didn't want to miss the opportunity to highlight how to bring the patient into the fold of that conversation around data in addition to the patient experience. That I think transitions well to your relevant conversation, and I smiled a little bit. I think if you ask any clinician, they'll say, well, I want all the data, but that's not really what they mean. They mean they want the right data at the right time. And so in looking at the relevancy of the data, it is ensuring that you have a cross-clinical counsel, as well as engagement from finance, regulatory, legal, and compliance in terms of what data do you need to have available to take care of that patient in the moment versus data that you can go back and reference to understand the full history to further their care for the patient. And that's when I think we're really looking at what is data that needs to be migrated versus data that needs to be archived. We do now have advancements in technology where the archive is available within the EMR. And so if you need to surface further history of data, specifically on types of patients, that's where an archiving conversation comes in. So to drive relevance, I look at it as what does the clinician need at that point in time to care for a patient versus what do they need for the long-term care, as well as if you're a research organization, how are you going to use that data for future health advancements?
Excellent. Rich, anywhere you want to jump in there?
I think these two ladies hit everything. The only thing I'd add, we've kind of touched on archives a little bit. The advancement of archives just over the past 1 to 2 years has been drastic. Most people, and I think why organizations aren't leveraging, or smaller organizations, archives to their fullest extent is they still have that stigma of, it's kind of that dump and drop and it's out there to die forever, right? You're not able to access that data. You have to go into a separate database. The archives today are truly integrated with your current EHR, with your HIM platform to ensure your legal health record remains intact, and it's pulling that relevant data that's needed for the patient into that output. So I think organizations, again, such as yours, that are more progressive already know. However, other organizations may not be viewing archives and understanding the true extent of the functionality that they present and the benefits they present for organizations, even just from a cyber standpoint, right? Get rid of all of those legacy systems and entry points into your organization. That data is still there, right? You still have access to it. It can integrate with your EHR. Why not look at that, even just from a cyber standpoint of limit my risk and I still have the data available to me?
Rich, how are people making the decision of what data is going into the new EMR and what's going into the archive? Where are you looking for that line?
Yeah, again, it goes back to that cross-functional or multidisciplinary team. Um, we've talked about the right folks at the table, right? Within our organization, the president of our company uses the quarterback analogy all the time, right? There has to be a quarterback that's driving that charge because everybody at the table needs to have a voice, but there needs to be a way to get through roadblocks and make those decisions in an efficient manner, but also an effective manner to ensure that you're meeting the needs within a reasonable expectation. So again, I think it all goes back to that key stakeholder group to help drive those decisions on what's being migrated, what makes sense, and what's necessary, and then everything else to the archive. We've definitely seen a shift. It's X type of patient data for 1 year or 3 years going to an EHR, and everything else then off again to a different platform.
And Rich, to your point, I think it's really with that cross-disciplinary group is painting the picture for them in the beginning of what is the data what is it going to look like in the EMR when it's migrated versus how is that data accessible when it's archived. And because folks don't understand that story. And so if you're able to articulate that and share with them examples of the experience, it changes the conversation of needing to migrate everything versus, as an example, from an Emory perspective, we migrated 3 years for the majority of our data.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say that content is one thing, time frame. The discussions might be quite different. what are we going to migrate discrete data from a discrete data standpoint, and how far back until it turns into an archive discussion. So
Mhm.
time frame was actually the longer conversation for us.
Yeah.
All right, very good. We're gonna go to our Ask a Co-Panelist section and have some fun. Rich, let's start with you. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Um, I'll say to both. Right, one of the things that I mentioned early on is across the industry, um, the measurement of data quality. There's no true measurement. There's no set standard. Both of you have been very successful in not only setting up the governance, but KU especially with migrating these hundreds of systems to your new platform. So for an organization that's not quite at the level that Emory or RWJ are, what are the metrics that you would advise an organization to look at and really keep close to the chest from a KPI standpoint, right? Understanding you need to ensure that these are your KPIs, you're looking at this, you're measuring this to ensure the success of your organization and your project.
Well, there's two parts to that. I don't want to skip over the validation of the migrated data, because it's not necessarily KPI driven, but it is ensuring that that the data is whole, it's healthy, it's what you expected when you migrated it. So for us, that was a constant series of validations, and we actually migrated in parts and pieces rather than one huge move at a single time. It just made it a lot more tolerable to find problems and correct them before you had to go back and redo the whole thing all over again. So there's that, and the right validators, the folks who are truly going to know whether that information is correct or not. And then on the other side of that, just how do we make sure that from a KPI standpoint, we're staying true to clean and healthy data. We do a lot of that. It's actually not pointedly for that, but there are plenty of KPIs that help us realize on a daily basis that we're okay, that things are fine. Our regulatory reporting is 100%. At the top of that, just even I'll go back to the MPI, just even that, and just doing just regular checks on duplications and things. And we also have a culture of you see something, say something from a data perspective as well. That's more qualitative than quantitative, but it's a process, and it's part of our data governance to look at the same thing multiple times and over a long period of time. But it's not necessarily, there's not a big headline on top of the KPI that says, from what you're talking about. Bessie?
Yeah, and I would agree there's not a headline perspective from a KPI. We, of course, look at our duplication rates within patients, understanding that. It's more on how we create the optimal environment for success. So ensuring that we at Emory, it was a campaign around the integrity of our data. And Kay, I love the slogan of see something, say something. That's really important and speaks to a culture shift with the front line, that we are going to support you in identifying if something isn't correct or there's a problem. There's an avenue for you to voice that, and not only are you voicing it, but we celebrate it as a problem that we need to solve. And that really is what drove Emory's success, was creating the environment to drive the overall importance of data integrity.
All right, very good. We have a question from our audience, our good friend Bill Spooner. Yes, look at that smile. Okay, yes. Um, two questions for both Bessie and my dear friend Karen on data governance. One, there are a number of players, but who leads data governance in your organization? And two, do data governance issues reach up to your board and how? So Kay, let's start with you.
So I would say at the top of that list is coach, and they're not necessarily the chairs of our data governance, but they certainly are the voices and the dipso facto leaders. That is our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer, partnering with our Chief Health and Information Officer, a physician who sits in that seat. Together, they bring really important responsibilities to the table from a security aspect, as well as to sheer, data content and relevance, accuracy, all of that. They do that marriage of the two of them, leading our governance, data governance and quality quest, is a very good partnership.
Oh, very good, Bessie.
Yeah, from an Emory perspective, it really is part of our overall digital chief officers. And we're one of the more advanced in that we do have a chief information data officer who drives the integrity of the data, as well as shepherding that data out to each of the departments. So being able to show, now that you have the data, here's the outcomes that you can represent, which I'm very excited because that communication and that drive landed with our board to support what we call a unified data platform. So taking, not only when you migrate an EHR, you still have numerous systems, and making sure that we're taking all of our data and putting it into one platform to be able to run analytics against.
All right, listen, we are almost out of time. I'm gonna give us a chance for final thoughts. And I think you have to give a scenario uh for this. I think it helps with the question. So let's say we're talking to the CIO of a health system that they're gonna go down the EMR migration road, and they're just working on those plans. What would be your advice around keeping the data component of this in mind, as to how it will affect timelines and budget and things like that? So, Bessie, let's start with you.
All right. Well, I do want to say thank you for having me today. This is a topic that I am really passionate about. And on that note, I would say to a CIO that this is a requirement. I love how Kay articulated that in the beginning. It is a requirement that you seize the opportunity as you move into a new EHR. You are given the opportunity to rebuild that foundation and align your data with the workflows within your organization. Don't miss the chance to do that. It will pay dividends forward, or it will cost you dramatically if you try and wait and do that. It's junk in, junk out. So my challenge to you is seize the day and create the optimal environment for your organization as they move forward with data integrity.
Wonderful. Kay?
Thank you, Bessie. I agree with everything that you said. Great advice. And here's what I'll add. Remember that you are divorcing a vendor,
Mm.
and in some cases, many vendors, and you are reliant on their continued partnership until you actually have all that data migrated and archived. And so we ran into a situation where we didn't have enough runway for view only. And our archival wasn't going as quickly as we had hoped. So we were very nice. We stayed friendly, and we stayed very cognizant of the fact that you are very, very dependent on that vendor that you're divorcing until the very end. So keep that relationship in mind, nurture it, send flowers, cards, candy, whatever you have to do. But it's very, very important to maintain those relationships. So I thought I would add that as a piece of advice with your migration journey.
That is such a good piece of advice, Kay, and I think you might save people a lot of grief if they keep that in mind. So thank you. Rich, we're going to give you the final word.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to follow that one. But
Yeah, that's good.
Anthony, thank you for hosting. Kay and Bessie, really appreciate you both and your insight. To just add on, I think the only thing I'd say that hasn't already been said, invest in your data. This is the time to invest in your data for the betterment of your organization, both short-term and long-term. Again, you're focused on that EHR. You need to look at the data. You need to invest. Put your governance in place. Don't kick this can down the road. And lastly, ensure you have the right folks at the table. A lot of organizations, they don't have this core competency in-house of validating data. So if you don't be afraid to look to ensure, right, you're bringing the right people to the table to ensure that quality in the long run.
Absolutely wonderful advice. Great event, guys. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording of this is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team or go to our website to view upcoming panels, register. With that, I want to thank our tremendous panel, Kmar Hefka, Bessie J, and Rich Emilio, and E4Health for sponsoring. And I want to thank you for attending. With that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Bye.